Thank you, Scott. I think we got a little bit of country in this church, starting right up here in front. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah are all buried in that spot. That's pretty amazing. All the patriarchs and all the matriarchs, with the exception of Rachel, are buried in the same location, which starts in the passage we're looking at tonight in Genesis 23, when Abraham sought a burial grounds for his wife Sarah when she died. That structure has a long and very colorful history. It was probably built by Herod the Great, probably as a practice run before building the temple. Building the Temple Mount, all the structure around it, the retaining walls that I mentioned today around Mount Moriah. It dates to that time. It's very, very Herodian in style, but its history has been very diverse ever since. During the Byzantine period, it was a Christian church and had a major role throughout much of Christianity, early Christianity, until the Arab conquest in the 7th century, when it became a mosque. It went back and forth during the period of the Crusades, has remained a mosque, but through all of that history, it has also been a Jewish synagogue. In fact, several synagogues. The structure itself is now divided by a very complicated status quo to allow different groups to visit, different groups to have their own worship services without ever having to come in contact with anybody. How do you do that inside a big structure like that? It's been the focus of a lot of problems. The status quo was finally worked out in 1997. But this week, wouldn't you know it, on Friday this week, another UN resolution was passed that has to do with this. And we all wonder, where's Nikki Haley when we need her? Well, it didn't happen in the General Assembly. It happened in a UNESCO headquarters in Europe, and rather rushed, and part of its secret ballot was passed. The UNESCO World Heritage element added this to the list of World Heritage sites. That's a little evidence of the Herodian masonry there around it. It is located in what Jewish people today still call Kiryat Arba. We'll see that name here in the text as we read it. But it's the greater area of Hebron. However, after the status quo, it was on the Jewish side of the dividing line. And there's a little alleyway, Shuhada Street, and the Shuk, or the Kasbah, is an access from one corner, and that's been part of the ongoing, pretty much daily struggles there in Hebron. Well, the UNESCO passed by a vote of 12 in favor, 3 against, with 6 abstentions, that this should be added to the list of World Heritage Sites. That's certainly legitimate. And then it was fast-tracked. Normally it takes a full year after that vote. It was fast-tracked to be put on the endangered list, and it's because of the Jewish destruction of the site, supposedly. The statement refers to an alarming number of violations that include vandalism, property damage, and other attacks that have an impact on the authenticity and integrity. Authenticity being, of course, that this is actually a Jewish site. It's called the Mosque of Ibrahim and his family. So there's a legitimate claim on the side of Abraham, but not through Sarah and not through any of the rest of his family to this location. It's a tragedy and very poorly handled and not going to go away overnight. Now, we'll come back to a little bit of that later, but I really would like to get into our text in Genesis 23, which tells about the death of Sarah and how Abraham acquired this location. It looked very different back then. In fact, the text hints even here that it was probably quite beautiful. There's a field with trees that are involved in the purchase. It's near, every time it's mentioned, it's somewhere close to Mamre. If you remember, Abraham has settled in Mamre. Rachel has lived in a tent with him there for decades. I'm guessing that this is, Sarah, I'm guessing that this is maybe one of her favorite little spots. You know, in the evening after the dishes were washed, a chance to get out and get some cool air and take a little walk down here in this field. And there's an interesting cave there. Even on a hot day, you could get out of the sun there and have a little more coolness and enjoy the outdoors. It wasn't a big, ugly city yet at that point. In that little corner, you can see where the Jewish people are gathered. There is actually a hole about this size through which you can look and see inside the cave. Now, actually, you can't see anything because there's no lights in there, so it's just you're looking into a little tiny dark hole. The word Machpelah is of uncertain etymology, but it seems to be somehow related to like a division, a separation. And the best thought that I've been able to find on it is that this cave had compartments, two parts. It's not sure if it's side by side or maybe over under. If it's over under, this could make some sense. Because when you kind of come in up on top, which is very complicated anymore now, but I was in there in the early 80s, and there's looks like a well or something with a cap on it and a metal plate. There's some little holes drilled in it so you can look down into supposedly this same cave and see darkness again. But there have been different instances throughout history where people got in and people tell us that there's something in there, and it kind of sort of maybe looks like a cave or something. On top, at the walk-in level, there are 6 large cenotaphs. A cenotaph is a above-ground tomb. It's very large. One of the cenotaphs would occupy most of the platform here behind me, and they have beautiful embroidered drapery things over them, and all kinds of Arabic inscriptions and things like that. Those 6 cenotaphs are for the patriarchs and matriarchs minus Rachel. Now, do I believe all that? I'm not entirely sure. It's a tradition. It's a long, long-standing tradition that goes way back. But alongside that tradition, Adam and Eve are buried in the cave of Machpelah. And I definitely don't believe that. So there are some crazy things here, but Jewish people for centuries have been allowed in the best of times and the worst of times to come over here near that little hole and peek inside. Through the status quo now, they have opportunities to go inside up above, but it's often closed, often very problematic. Let's take a look at our passage here in Genesis 23 and find out how this whole story about the cave of Machpelah in the field of Heth, Ephron, one of the sons of Heth, are here to this day. I'm going to read just the first 9 verses as we start, and our topic for this first point is Abraham's grief, because we find his mourning after the death of his wife Sarah. Now, Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. She's the only woman in the Bible whose age is given at the time of her death. And twice, in fact, it's referred to here, and shows you something of the significance of this woman and this site. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Then Abraham rose from before his dead and spoke to the sons of Heth, saying, I'm a stranger and a sojourner among you. Give me a burial site among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The sons of Heth answered Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will refuse you his grave for burying your dead. So Abraham rose and bowed to the people of the land, the sons of Heth, and he spoke with them, saying, If it is your wish for me to bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and approach Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he owns, which is at the end of his field. For the full price, let him give it to me in your presence for a burial site. The opening verses speak about Abraham's tears. Sarah had lived for 127 years. Now, do the math, and you'll figure out that means that they were married for more than 100 years. We're not given the time of the wedding of the two, but she's his wife before they get to Haran because he brings his wife Sarah out of Haran. Typical would have been to be married around the age of 15, so she's 127. They've been married for a long, very long time. Isaac is now 37 years old. We saw him this morning at maybe 14, 15, something like that. Previously, we saw him at roughly 3 years of age when he was weaned. And all of a sudden here, all of this story just really begins to stretch out for us. We have Isaac, age 37. It's still 3 years before he gets married. That's going to be the next chapter. We're also told that Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, and it's in the land of Canaan. Kiryat Arba is a good Jewish name. The village of Arba, we'll come back to that in just a minute, but Kiryat means city of or town of, and it appears already in the book of Joshua twice. So it's related all the way back to the time of the conquest under this name, Kiryat Arba. Of course, we predate that in this story, and we don't know the etymology or the background of the name Hebron, but it has throughout history, apparently as far back as Abraham, had that as a separate name. And of course, in the land of Canaan is significant in that that's the very land that was promised and given to Abraham. Now, the city of Arba in Joshua 21, verse 11, and in Joshua 14:14, and I put them in that order because the two details here fit together that way. In Joshua 21:11, he's called the father of Anak. Now, that might not mean a lot to you, except that the Hebrew word Anak means giant, really big guy. Goliath was part of the Anakim. Now, there's little a, Anakim, and big A, Anakim, and that's what we're dealing with here, because here's an individual who probably is named because of his great stature, whose name is Anak, and we find out that Arba is the father of Anak. If the boy is tall, imagine the dad. In chapter 14, verse 14, it gives us another little detail. It talks about the greatest man among the Anakim. So Arba is not just a giant, he's one of the greatest of the giants of that time during the days of Joshua. Next phrase, though, as we come to this, is Abraham is mourning, and he went in to mourn and weep. The words are synonymous. Obviously, there's a relationship between them, but they are more intense by their use together like this. The Jewish Publication Society translates this as, he proceeded to mourn and to bewail her. F.B. Meyer has an interesting statement about tears, and you're crying, you're weeping, Pastor. Probably could say something to you about that subject. F.B. Meyer says, tears relieve the burning brain, just like a shower, the electric clouds. Tears discharge the insupportable agony of the hearer, as an overflow lessens the pressure of the flood against the dam. Tears are the material out of which heaven weaves its brightest rainbows. Tears are transmuted into the jewels of better life as the wounds in an oyster turn to pearls. These are genuine tears of the end of a long companionship, 100-year-old marriage. But they're not tears of bitterness nor unsubmissiveness. Abraham has learned by now. He is submitted to God's purpose and will for him, but he still has a long time to live after Sarah's death. The next phrase says that he rose from before his dead. It was common for mourners to sit. You think even of the story about Job, which is of a similar time frame here, and his miserable comforters came in to sit with him and talk to him. It wasn't mourning for a death, but it was a display of mutual grief, in this case over sickness or pain. For Abraham, he rose from before his dead, and he goes then to speak with the sons of Heth. Now, depending on your translation, this presents a real problem. First of all, I got to do this because I'm a Hebrew scholar. There is no th in Hebrew, no th sound. So it for sure wasn't Heth. Actually, it's worse than that, because the letter that in English we normally use in transliterations for tav comes out as a th. This isn't a tav, it's a tate. It's the 9th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Never an H sound related to that, not even in our transliteration system. So I can't explain why they didn't do a better job of that here in some of our Bibles. They should have known better. But here's the problem. Some of your translations say Hittites. The King James has that, the ESV has that, the NIV has that, and several others. Well, we know from historical evidence that the Hittites weren't down in this region. They're Indo-European peoples. They're way to the north, and they may or have had influence, and I think in that regard it could be very similar to what we talked about last week, the Philistines in the days of Abraham. They're named that in the Bible. This could be a similar situation. But in fact, the Hittites are called Hittim in the Bible. These are called B'nai Het. It's not even a similar kind of construction. So I'm going to stick with what the NASV, I think, has accurately recorded for us here, the sons of Heth. Heth is an individual. He's somebody that's there in the town. And the inhabitants, the descendants, are part of this group of people now among whom Abraham finds himself and with whom he must deal. And notice what he says, I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. This is after living there for 60 years. I know it's pretty hard for a Californian to break through up in Garden Valley. You can be around for a couple decades and you're still not quite one of us. It's sort of like Fiddler on the Roof. Remember when Perchik shows up and one of the Orthodox Jewish guys there says, you're not from here, are you? Abraham's been here for 60 years, and still he refers to himself, because no doubt they do, as a foreigner, a stranger and a sojourner. I think the closest thing to an English translation that would help us is a resident alien. Ger vetoshav is the Hebrew words that are used here, and it has the idea of somebody that's settled down, but he's still a foreigner. A foreigner, a resident alien here, would have two big problems. Number one, you can't use the common burial site. They don't let strangers, foreigners, weirdos get buried in the same burial plot with all of us'uns. And that still happens today. I don't know if you've visited burial sites in Europe, but even here in the United States, a lot of times you'll find a little corner over there for the people of the wrong color or the wrong religion or whatever else. Not going to bury them in our common burial site. And secondly, he, as a foreigner, would not be allowed to purchase some part of our land, part of our inheritance. And we find that recorded for us in many different places in Scripture. Remember the story about Ahab wanting to buy Naboth's vineyard, and Naboth says, God forbid that I should sell that to you. Well, that's right, because God had forbidden it. It was his tribal inheritance. He couldn't sell it to somebody that was outside of his tribe. Now, that's a later, very Jewish situation, but that's a common human situation all over the world. And in this case, he knew that this was going to be a complicated thing, but he doesn't have a lot of time here to negotiate. So he says, give me a burial site among you. He starts slow, and he starts with this word give, which is the common, one of the most repeated words in the Bible for give, natan. But depending on the context, it can have a number of other nuances. However, because it's such a common term, like it can mean sell. It can mean to pay for something. You give it to me, but I'm going to buy it. I will pay you for it. The word is used 7 times here in this couple of paragraphs, in this context. And it's really part of the maneuvering, the negotiating, the stuff that's going on. It's hard for us to spot that maybe at surface level in this text. Sarna, the commentator for the JPS, says, its use permits the dialogue to be conducted in an atmosphere of delicate and dignified, if somewhat contrived, politeness. I mean, it's really a question, will you please sell me some land? But he uses this more moderate term, and they continue to kind of banter with him. He thought that they probably wouldn't be happy with the idea of him purchasing some land. So he starts here with, let me bury my dead out of my sight. And of course, they would be just as interested in that, wouldn't they? You don't want a cadaver laying around somewhere polluting the place. So he goes to them legitimately with this request. After all, he's a foreigner, but he's a resident alien. His testimony is of some significance here, as it's recorded for us in verses 5 and 6. Their response to him right away is, you are a mighty prince among us. Well, I should hope so. He saved their bacon. Jewish people probably didn't do that. Saved their lives, helped them when the Mesopotamians had come in and trashed the place. They destroyed the cities of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, but they also swung up through the middle of the country. And Abraham gathered his personal militia to go against them and brings back the spoils of war. And that story, no doubt, has gotten around. He, in a previous chapter here, has negotiated quite favorably and well with Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. So the Philistines aren't going to be attacking the area. Abraham was a mighty prince among them, and they understood and respected that. And so they say to him, bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. My guess is that that was a little bit tongue-in-cheek here. Bury it in the choicest grave, but not mine. And almost that's what we get here in this next phrase. None of us will refuse you, but I sure hope you don't ask me. Abraham really passed the first hurdle in this opening negotiation here. When he puts out his request, stated the way he does, and they are now forced to respond, and the only appropriate, proper response has to be, like they just said, you can take your pick, nobody's going to refuse you. So he makes an offer here, verses 7 to 9. And I was really happy that there is a synonym for offer that starts with T. It isn't appropriate here. He tenders an option for them. There's a lot of politics going on all the way through this. First of all, the first phrase we find here is that Abraham bowed to the people of the land. The people of the land is an interesting phrase that's used in a couple of different contexts in the Old Testament. It usually means the commoners. Frequently means the people who don't have a whole lot of education, the day laborers, the ordinary people. Now, we know that he's dealing here. In fact, his next request is going to, I think, indicate some level of nobility in this, but he bows down to the people of the land. This isn't a nose-in-the-air snub to the ordinary people. He recognizes that this affects everybody, and so he bows down, a very astute approach, because the sale of land here is going to upset the local demographic balance in several different ways. By the way, he bows down to them twice. Also, it does the same in verse 12. Then notice what he says. Approach Ephron, the son of Zohar, for me. Now, son of is a very common Jewish or Hebrew descriptor. I mean, that's of ultimate importance, that the son of and the son of and the son of, to show your lineage, your ancestry. But it's not so common among the Canaanites. In fact, in much of the Middle East today, once you have a son born, you become the father of so-and-so, and who you were the son of begins to fade. The fact that Ephron, this son of Heth, is referred to as the son of Zohar is probably an indication of special position for him, possibly nobility. And I find some support for that in a couple of the phrases that follow. Notice just down below here, they talk about the gate of his city in the next verse. His city, not ours, or the city that we all live in, but his city. So this is all of a sudden a much higher level of negotiation that goes on, and Abraham has been very astute in approaching this. And now Abraham comes in with his very specific request. I would like to purchase the cave of Machpelah. That's what he asks for. There's reference here that it is located at the end of the field. And this, of course, fits what was common burial practices during this age, which is called the Middle Bronze period. They didn't carve out nice square tombs. They didn't build something above ground yet. They typically would use a cave or even a hole in the ground, and then often they would make little chambers off of that or down in the ground. It's called cyst burial because it looks like a bunch of little cysts in the underground system there. If this cave is actually a separated or a two-part cave of some sort, it seems to be very appropriate because that means there's going to be room for other burials in the future. And he asks for the cave, not for the field. And now, his next gambit, he says, for the full price, let him give it to me. There's our word again. In your presence. He wants to have witnesses. He wants to have a sealed document, a legal transaction of some sort here. Let him give it to me for the full price. Now, I was smart, but it also opened the door for the next problem. Let's take a look at Ephron here in verses 10 through 16. Now, Ephron was sitting among the sons of Heth, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the sons of Heth, even of all who went in at the gate of his city, saying, No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field. There's our word again. And I give you the cave that is in it. In the presence of the sons of my people, I give it to you. Bury your dead. Now, again, there's some negotiating that's going on here in the terminology that's used. So notice Abraham now, verse 12. Abraham bowed before the people of the land. And he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, If you will only please listen to me, I will give the price of the field. Accept it from me, that I may bury my dead there. And then Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, My lord, listen to me, a piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver, what is that between me and you? So bury your dead. I wish I could get the recording of that voice there, because it's a very sly response. He has exaggerated the price grievously here. He has jacked up the price now to a point where everybody knows Abraham can't accept that. But Abraham's made his offer. Here comes the counter proposal. And frankly, from that point on, there's no more negotiation. Either Abraham pays the price or he loses the opportunity, and the next one's going to be harder to get. So Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver, which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth. He can't backtrack now. 400 shekels of silver, commercial standard. Ephron's very smooth here when he answers Abraham. He wants to make sure that it's done also publicly, done in their hearing. And notice it's before all who went in at the gate of his city. This is the civic center, we could say. This is the place where decisions need to be ratified and made. This is where court records need to be kept. And so it's probably a reference here that everyone who went in of his city wasn't necessarily all the population, but especially the people who spent time in the city gate, the city council. We have, again, numerous references in the Bible to this being the place of the elders of the city, being seated for judgment and determination of cases that are brought before them. But this sale involved all the inhabitants, and it was much more than just a simple sale. So there needed to be this kind of a legal binding agreement between them. So he says, "No, my lord, hear me. I give you the field. I give you the cave that's in it also." Now, the field would no longer be useful for anything to him. He's not going to build his house there. He's going to have a hard time selling it to somebody else to build his house there, because who wants a grave in their backyard? And it's as if the rest of it's worthless to me, so you want to buy the cave, but you got to take the field with it. There's also a tax issue involved here. If he were to sell the cave but not the field, he would still have to pay full taxes on the field, because that's where the productivity is. The cave is kind of an add-on, an extra here. He can't split up the property that way according to early law regarding property sales. So he says, if you're going to take it all. But his squeeze comes in the next couple of verses then, 12 to 15. He says, "I'll give the price of the field. I'll name you a price now. And as long as you understand this is the price of the field, if you want the cave, you got to buy the field too. A piece of land worth 400 shekels of silver." Coins didn't exist yet, right? That doesn't happen until right toward the end of the Old Testament. We know that there were some coins in the days of Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and they were minted outside, and right at the tail end of that, some of the political leaders, the administrators in Jerusalem obtained permission to mint coins locally, but basically after the Old Testament biblical periods. So it was literally pieces of silver determined by weight. His statement here, "What is that between us?" is, again, very much tongue-in-cheek, because everybody is witness now to this negotiation that's going on, and they have both made their offers back and forth, neither of which now can back down from what they'd offer without losing it. But once Ephron named his price, Abraham couldn't bargain anymore. It's very difficult to find out how much is 400 shekels of silver at that time period. Our text says the commercial value, or that is the going rate on the exchange, and we don't know what that is. We can go by numbers. We can go by being silver or being gold, obvious difference there. But there is a lot of back and forth on this. If you check 10 commentaries, you'll probably get 8 different answers to it. Here's one thing that we can go by. In 2 Samuel 24:24, when David buys the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, that's the top of Mount Moriah that we talked about this morning. David purchases that for the future construction of the temple there. So we're maybe 50 miles apart. Less than that, more like 30 miles apart, 25 to 30. In the Judean hill country, 1,000-year difference in time. That's not helpful. But when he buys it in 2 Samuel 24, it's for 50 shekels of silver. So here we are 1,000 years earlier, before inflation, for 400 shekels. I think that's an indicator of how inflated this price was. But the sale comes off there in verse 16. Abraham weighed out the silver which he had named. And it is a total of 400 shekels of silver, commercial standard. So it's according to a unit of weight, not according to coins. We have in several different excavations a variety of sizes of weights, which are also often named. It'll have an alphabetic letter or something on it to indicate its value, from little to big, obviously, but you could use that for weighing out pieces of whatever. And the drawing in the lower left there is actually from Egypt. We don't have any local drawings, although from around the time of David, archaeologists have now found some of the pieces of an actual scale, the crossbar and the little dish with apparently some sort of a chain to be able to do the scale, the weight of it there. So that's the transaction that takes place, and now we're finally to verses 17 through 20 in the actual burial of Sarah. So Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, which faced Mamre, the field and cave which is in it, and all the trees which were in the field that were within all the confines of its border. This is Middle Bronze legalese. This is a contract. All the trees which were in the field and that were within all the confines of its border were deeded over to Abraham for a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth, before all who went in at the gate of his city. After this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field at Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that is in it were deeded over to Abraham for a burial site by the sons of Heth. Everything about that reads like a contract, doesn't it? This is legalese from 2000 BC. But you get the repetition, the interest in details. This is the first time we're told about all the trees that are there. They had to be part of the contract too, because someone could be able to go back and reap the harvest of the trees. He sold the land but not the trees, or vice versa. So the site is located here in Ephron's field and the cave, which was the point of interest here, that was in it. Notice again, it says it's in Machpelah, which faced Mamre. It's near where they'd been living now for a long time, and I take from that this could very easily be maybe one of Sarah's favorite little spots, a place where she would have delighted to go when she had opportunity and went out for a walk with her husband. And notice all the trees which were in the field that were within all the confines of its border. That's a very common part of ancient Near East contracts. In fact, part of the reason why the land is so denuded today has to do with a law that was passed during the Turkish Ottoman period, about 100 to 200 years before the British mandate that followed World War I. The Turks had put a tree tax on that area, which meant if you have 13 trees in your yard, you got to pay 13 times the tax. So you can guess what happened to a lot of the trees. They just got eliminated so you could lower your taxes. And it denuded much of the land. And of course, without the tree cover, that diminishes also the humidity, the moisture content that will remain, and created havoc in the land of Israel. It was all deeded over to Abraham, and I just conclude with this idea of the sanctity of this site, going back to what we had been talking about, and then I'll give you some points in conclusion. It says, Abraham buried Sarah. They're rather terse, no descriptive detail. In fact, Jewish burials are to this day very simple, unostentatious. There might be a lot of other ostentation about things, but not the actual burial itself. And it was in the cave of the field at Machpelah facing Mamre, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Now take a look at some of the location once again there and the significance, or as I've called it here, the sanctity of this site. This is going to be Father Abraham's burial place. To some extent, that makes it of significance to you and me, because we are, in Galatians and Romans, understood to be children of Abraham. Not his physical descendants, but he is our spiritual father because of the Abrahamic covenant. And so we have here, first of all, the tombs of Abraham and Isaac. First Sarah, and then Abraham. And then, before this story is over in Genesis, we have also Isaac and Rebekah buried here. And added to that is Jacob and Leah. Rachel died before arriving on site, and she's buried at a spot possibly north of Jerusalem. The traditional site is actually south of Jerusalem, where Rachel's tomb, so-called, is identified. It's holy, first and foremost, to the Jewish people. It is the second most holy site for Judaism. Fourth holiest site in terms of Islamic theology, and therefore the mosque has occupied, the building has been occupied by a mosque for all of these recent centuries. It's a very contorted approach from each side. To the right of that picture is Jewish neighborhood. Most of the upper right, upper left, and lower left is no man's land, and there have been skirmishes of variety in those areas. There's a little trail, a little access at the corner there on the left side of the photograph. And inside, during most times of the day, there are Muslim worshipers, and during set hours, they are cleared out. Soldiers stand guard. And by the way, the Israeli army is the only army that has shed its blood on this site and others to maintain the religious liberty of other faiths. The only one. What can we say wrapping this up? It's been a lot of history, a lot of very interesting details, no doubt, but what do I take home with me tonight? F.B. Meyer has an interesting statement here. When Abraham came down the slopes of Mount Moriah, that's what we looked at this morning, 60 years of his long life still lay before him. What happened in those serene and untroubled years, which lie between these two chapters, as a valley between two ridges of hills, we do not know. The river of Abraham's life had passed the rapids and the narrows of its earlier course, and now broadened into reaches of still water, over which its current blended with an almost imperceptible movement. A lot of history has happened since chapter 22. And as we approach now this point in Abraham's life, another time of crisis of a different sort happens with the death of his wife. One application to draw from this is God intends for marriage to be a shared journey. 100 years of married life here, from Ur to Canaan to Egypt and back again, and even within Canaan, multiple moves. It's kind of like the old country song, I know you're tired of following my elusive dreams and schemes. And Sarah did it, and Abraham loved his wife through all that time and honored her. They had a life together during all of that time. Maybe not in the same sense that we romantic 21st century people might think, but they shared life together. And married life is intended to be that. Be very careful about growing separate. Two different ways, two different lives, two different bedrooms, two different everything else, two different sets of interests. You both need to work at making those lines cross with regularity and frequency. Okay, I said bedrooms. I know that there are some reasons. I'm a horrible snorer, but I won't let her go elsewhere. And she's just had to learn how to grin and bear it. My grandpa and grandma had separate bedrooms, so I understand the differences and the struggles and the problems that are involved there. And really, that's kind of a cosmetic question right here. But what I'm saying is, don't end up with different interests and different schedules and different things you like to do that the other one doesn't necessarily like, and you just begin to grow more and more and more distant. It's a common thing for couples that have been married for a long time. And I don't need to say a whole lot more about that at this moment. Number 2, God intends for marriage to be a passing of the torch to the next generation or generations. We're going to find that in Isaac now. We're not going to continue with his story, but next chapter is the finding of a bride for Isaac. No doubt Sarah must have talked to her boy during those many years that he wasn't married. No doubt both Abraham and Sarah have said, don't pick one of these Canaanite gals. They'll get you in trouble. Don't marry an unbeliever. It's not worth it. You'll pay a heavy price. Marriage is not intended as an evangelistic opportunity. That rarely works out. Look at the heartache and the broken families and homes. Make sure you marry a believer, someone who loves God. Not just a believer. There's a bunch of them. But a growing believer. Somebody who loves the Lord and wants to follow and serve Him so that you can grow and you can nurture each other. God intends for marriage to be that so that you can pass it on to the next generations. We find some of the same in Jacob, and we find it all the way down through Jewish history. Jewish people, by and large, have been exemplary in their wedded bliss. Number 3, God shows us here, I think, something about how to let go and about how to remember. Early in this passage, it said, Abraham rose up from his mourning. There needs to be some limitations. You never forget that person, I hope. You never completely lose those feelings and sensibilities, but there must be a time where you rise up from your mourning. There must be a time when the death of a spouse is understood as that. The death of a spouse doesn't mean the death of the other partner. Life does go on. Life must go on from that point. And that's as important for that partner to let go as it is for the children of that marriage. Now, this is going to be a hard thing for me to say to you if you're in the middle of it, so you can plug your ears, but let me say it to the rest of us, and especially to you kids that are here. If God should take mommy or daddy, don't you be a difficulty to them for what the next step may be. Sure, you shouldn't get married too soon, but neither should you draw it out without appropriate reasons. Now, my mom never remarried, and I think she did right, but she did not remarry because of us kids. Very early on, we talked together and we went to Mom and said, Mom, this is your life. This is what you need to decide. And maybe I don't like that second guy that she picks. Or, maybe I think, it's even a mistake or something. But that's not for me to say. That's not my decision. And I think we need to be very careful about allowing people to mourn appropriately, to remember their loss, of course, as Abraham does here. And look at this, 4,000 years later, we're still remembering his loss. But also the opportunity to be able to move on. Abraham's going to remarry here coming up. That's kind of interesting. 100 and, 50-year-old guy? Remembering the dead has a very great value and a very grave danger. And when I wrote that down, there was no pun intended in that. A grave danger in not being able to turn that over to the Lord, being able to allow him to work in you and to help you to continue to trust him for the days and years ahead. But we must remember the dead in honor, respect, and in honor, preferring and loving them, of course. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for some pretty ordinary topics that have been left for us in some unexpected places in Scripture like this one. Thank you for recording for us some of the details here that help us to understand and help us to find the appropriate applications. One size doesn't fit all of us here or anywhere else. But we know that you are our sovereign Lord who loves us and is in perfect and continual control of all things, and we love you for that, and we trust you. And we ask for your encouragement and help and strength as we read your word and seek to understand your ways, and as we desire that you will help us to obey you. We thank you in Jesus' name. This is the month of July, and that means after church on Sunday